Hello and welcome into Coach Yeager's Playbook presented by Reeves Construction. We are on Spartan Stadium turf, pre-recording this a little bit earlier this week. William Galloway alongside Coach Yeager. Good to see you, Coach.
You too, William.
And didn't quite prepare myself for the elements, but nonetheless, we're getting ready for kickoff. As you watch this tonight, we're at Oxford Mountain Brook taking on the Yellow Jackets, second region game of the season, but Mountain Brook trying to get back on the right side of things, fell at Pell City last week 10-3. So Coach, just overall, we'll talk about the game in a moment, but trying to turn the table a little bit to get back on the right side of the scoreboard. What's been your thought process this week, and as you kind of try and get ready to put that one in the back burner and focus on tonight's game?
Sure. Well, after the game, we're coming back on the bus and everything, and you start, it's natural when you go through work as hard as you do and the outcome is not exactly what you want. It's easy to have doubts. It's easy to second guess, and we tell our guys all the time, you don't complain, you don't blame, you don't defend. You face it and you move on. And so the three questions, really I've been asking myself, is how can I get better? What can I learn? And what do the people around me need? In other words, how can I help them improve and learn and get better? So anyway, try to focus on, the whole team, focus on outside of myself and focus on others. And usually that's what leads to improvement. And the thing that's been good too, got up early Saturday morning, started looking at the film. And again, you see some things that are just so easy to fix, and it excites you, and you start looking forward to this game. So that's been the mindset of all of us.
Let's talk about that film and kind of what you saw in that game. The defense was phenomenal. We'll talk about two defensive linemen here in just a couple minutes in our player feature of the week. But offensively, we couldn't quite find the goal line. We did once and had it called back, and so kind of a couple miscues and all those things you wish you had back. But ultimately, what was the determining factor in the game that didn't put us where we needed to be to come out on top?
Well, in football, the margin for error is just so small. It's just an incredibly unforgiving sport. And, the week before, we had played really, really hard to the end. We played longer and harder, and I'll be honest with you. I felt like, that game meant a lot to Pell City, and they played really, really hard. And it's a game that we can learn about playing with passion and stuff. I felt like our defense played with incredible passion. They got after it. They rallied to the ball. We got better on defense. The thing that it did on offense is just reveal some areas that we've got to improve in, and so that's, looking at the film, that's what we took away from it.
I want to talk about the defensive linemen and two guys that stood out. I mean, the whole defensive line, they were feasting all night. And so I want to give them their flowers. They did a phenomenal job. But let's talk about Boyd Cooper and let's talk about John Thompson. They were leading the charge along with so many guys on that defensive front. The secondary defense was everywhere last week. But Boyd is a guy, we'll start with him. As a senior, started last year, worked alongside Coach Hamlin, multi-sport athlete. What do you see in Boyd in his performance on the field? How we were able to have success last week, and then also just what he brings to the team?
Well, number one, he's an extremely intelligent young man. To me, most defensive linemen aren't able to take in all the things, when they're looking at an offense, across the line of scrimmage at an offense. They're not able to take in a lot of things compared to some of the other positions, like a defensive back, whatever. But Boyd, he is so cerebral. He just takes in so much. A shift here, a little different stance there. And he makes a lot of plays. He's just out in front of guys a couple of 2 or 3 steps a lot of times, just because I think he just has that sixth sense, knows what to look for, and just got that feel. He knows what's coming. Plays at such a high, just such a high level, with just such passion and grit. And so he's what you want in your defensive line.
And then John Thompson didn't get to play the full game a couple weeks ago, but came back and he's rallying and picking up where he left off from early on in the season. He's a guy who's filling holes, plugging gaps, and really bringing his teammates alongside of him. That defensive front makes so many plays sometimes that the linebackers kind of just stand there and get to direct because the D-line is everywhere they need to be. Talk about John and what he brings to your program.
Well, the defensive line, for the most part, you're basically taking on blocks and allowing the linebackers to make tackles, like you said, but at the same time, you want to be as disruptive as possible. In other words, you want to be opportunistic. If you see, a misstep, a misfit on the offensive line, you want to slip through and basically create havoc. John, to me, he's one of those guys, he has no problem with being a selfless, serving kind of football player from the standpoint. He'll take on blocks and he'll allow linebackers to make tackles. He plays about that high off the ground, and exactly what you want your defensive line to do. But the other thing too is he's just a tough guy. He's been injured. How quick can I get back? He's been injured. How quick can I get back? And again, he's a giver also. He's playing defensive line. He's got a lot of ability and whatnot, but he sort of had his bumps and bruises and played through it. So he showed a lot of resilience in his ability to come back and continue to fight.
You talked about something I want to kind of re-emphasize, and we won't go through and name names, but we have had guys had season-ending injuries. We have had guys who were kind of on a week-to-week basis. What does it say about the grit and determination of these guys? They're 16, 17, 18 years old. They're resilient. Yeah. They'd get back out there and play with a broken leg if they have to. But with how few games we're guaranteed, right? We're at the halfway mark tonight, playing our 5th game of the regular season. What does it mean that they just want to get out there, give their blood, sweat, and tears, and their tibia could be hanging out of their leg, right?
Sure. Well, this game, it attracts a different kind of person. It attracts a tough person. Like I've said before, you play a man's game and men are going to show up to play. And, the thing that attracts them to the game is the physicality of the game. And so most of the time you think when a person's injured, they turn and they go the other way. But it's almost like the fireman that runs into a burning building. They run back into the fray. They see their guys and they're in the fight. They don't want to miss out on the fight. They want to be in there in the fight, and that's what you're looking for. You look for guys that really enjoy that part of the game, that they don't mind getting, their knuckles, bloodied and, bruised and whatever, and they just keep coming. And so that's just the nature of those guys, but it does say a lot about them, the fact that, they're willing to fight through, discomfort, pain, and a lot of times injury.
And I think we might see a couple bloody knuckles. This Oxford team tonight is really good, and it's a great challenge for us. And a game we kind of saw slip away late last year, and I know the guys have had this one circled since we walked off the turf last year at this game against the Yellow Jackets. So what's your message to the team tonight in approaching this game, and what do we have to do to stop what is one of the more potent teams in 6A and of course, in our region?
Well, it seems to me like, we tell our guys all the time that there's information that comes from inside the field house out to them, but there's also information that comes from the outside into them. And so, they hear from friends and media, social media. I know a lot of them are, pay a lot of attention to that. And people get in their minds, who should win this game and who the best teams are and whatever. And those are all things, that you cannot control. Those are all things that really detract from your ability to progress upward. It does. And so we try to tell them, it really doesn't matter, because if you get up for what we think is a quote unquote big game, well, that means that it's okay to take it easy or to back off a little bit from a game that people may not perceive as a big game. So, the bottom line is what we can control is we can control our response, number one, to challenges, our response last week to the setbacks, whatever that is. But again, we have a choice, and so they have a choice, and the only choice we have, we can't choose how good Oxford is, but we can choose, what we do to get better.
All right, so I got to ask you a quick question. We're standing here on the back of the half of the end zone in Spartan Stadium, but we hadn't played at Oxford, am I correct, since 2011?
I believe that's right.
We had maybe a game in between, but if not, that playoff game, 6A semifinal, I believe, or quarterfinal?
It was a quarterfinal.
Quarterfinal game at Oxford. Gavin Golson caught a catch, which was ruled a no catch. What do you remember about that game? That was an epic 2-3 overtime thriller, and something that my household still talks about. My brother-in-law still talks about, and he was the only one that found the end zone, Mark Rector, for the Spartans that night. Gavin Golson did. We'll leave that one in the past. He caught it, but wasn't ruled a catch. Tell us about that game, I guess, 14 years ago. Yeah, well, I've got a lot of memories from that game, just from the standpoint, it was a great game, but a few things that number one, we were undefeated up to that point. We were ranked number one in the state. We'd beat Hoover earlier in the year, and there were only 6 classifications at the time. Right. So there was no 7A at the time. But I remember, we go into overtime, and the thing I'll never forget was we wanted the side of the field closest to our student body. Well, and they did too. Well, when we won the toss, they went on offense first, we were on defense second. So we were on the end of the field where their student body was. Well, all of our fans ran down there, and we mixed and mingled in there with their fans. And so it was one of the most, we were on the sidelines and stuff. But we played from 10 yards in, and it must have been, I don't know, it seemed like 1,000 people in that little square space right there, but it was incredible. Then we go into our second overtime. It moves to the other end of the field,
And it's the same thing. Everybody runs down to the other end of the field, which was our end of the field.
Right.
But one thing I'll never forget, we got into, before that, it came down to the play with Gavin. We were on offense the second time, and I'll never forget, it was 4th down, and everybody said, do we kick or do we go for it? Because we had the ball first, that's what it was. And so we called Mark's number. And so I remember somebody said, that's pretty risky, if,
sure.
Going for it, it's maybe 4th and 1, 4th and 2, whatever it was, instead of kicking the ball. And I tell him, I said, you know what? If whatever Mark Rector does is the thing that we should have done,
we'll go with him. We'll go with him.
Yeah, and he scored, and so anyway, he sent us into, I guess, our second, third overtime, whatever it was. But anyway, heck of a game, it was a classic, and it's one you always remember. But great support from both teams, and I'm sure this one will be too.
I was late elementary school, and you talk about going back and forth, and I remember because there was a fence that lined the field, and so the team bench was up against the picket fence, and I remember, for some reason, as a 5th or 6th grade, 10, 11-year-old, I'm in front of all these high school kids. I guess I was just fast up and down the track.
Yeah.
And I remember having my face smushed in, trying to look through the fence and see everything. And here we are 14 years later in a regular season region game against a quality team tonight. Looking forward to the competition. I want to give a quick shout out to everybody watching tonight. And I know that we have thousands of people watch every Friday night, so I want to give them a big thank you. And thank you for tuning in to Mountain Brook Football. We know this game is also being simulcasted and broadcasted, in the Birmingham channel tonight. So thank you for choosing our broadcast. And with that, we're going to leave it with Coach Yeager and our final word, as we all do, always do each week. Also, thank you, viewers, for putting up with our iPhone quality end zone natural light footage today. I'm going to have to go get my eyes dilated after this. But Coach, anyways, enough for me. Closing thoughts as we get ready for tonight.
Well, we're excited about the challenge, and a opportunity to rebound, opportunity to learn, grow, and really excited about the people of Mount Brook growing with us, and learning a lot more about this team and the support that they've been to our football team and our staff and the entire school. So thank you, and know this is going to be a great game.
We'll be back in the studio next week. Until then, go Spartans! Excited about a great game. Check out a few highlights from last week's game at Pell City. Miller Crumpton on the pressure and brought down. 3 receivers to the top of your screen. Another handoff and another great stop from Boyd Cooper. 2nd down, Gossett, screen, delivers the hit. Ball scooped up by the Panthers years and years ago with the esteemed Warren Handrahan. And ball, interception. It's Miller Crumpton. Does it come away with it? Taco Mama turnover. Here we go. Miller. 19-yard line. Pressure from Boyd Cooper. Pressure from Miller Lee. It's a sack on 3rd down. Go Spartans.